time first to thank everybody for coming out. BookSync is the oldest independent bookstore in the West, so we wouldn't be here that long without your help, without the support of fellow book lovers and authors doing tours like this. So thank you to everyone here on this call. All right, tonight it is my pleasure to introduce not one, but two best-selling authors. Of course, we're all here to meet the talented Garth Nix and celebrate the release of his newest young adult fantasy, The Left-Handed Bookseller of London. Joining Garth in conversation tonight is the equally talented and prolific Maggie Stiefvater. We're so happy to have you here tonight, especially you, Garth, all the way from Australia, where it's already October 2nd for you. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Maggie to get things started.
Do I have to speak to make my face appear? That was happening? Yes. Okay, so I am Maggie Stiefvater. I am the author of The Raven Cycle, the Shipper Trilogy, and bunches of other books for young adults. I've actually toured with Garth before. He's a fantastic human being, and I really like his writing as well. And so I was very flattered to be asked to be in conversation with him tonight. What I was hoping to do, Garth, is that I was hoping that you would introduce this book for folks who have perhaps not read the description of it online, and talk about, first I want you to talk about if you feel like it's of a piece with your earlier work, or if it is a departure.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Maggie. I think describing you as equally talented falls far short of the mark. I think far more talented would actually be appropriate, considering you're an artist and a musician as well, which I've always been super jealous of, you know, to have all of those things. So I just thought I'd point that out.
Very nice.
Well, true, sad but true. The rest of my family is very musical. I wish I was. When you can't even sing a song all the way through in the same key, and you know it,
we have a name for that. It's a percussion.
Yes. Yeah, it's the drummer jokes. They always come out, don't they? But actually, my sense of rhythm's not that great either. I actually would be one of those stereotypical drummers who always speed up. You know, the knocking on the door. And also my family are all artists too. So and I don't really have that either. But anyway.
You just have incredible writing talent. That must be crushing.
Well.
That must just be awful.
At
What
least
is it
I have
like
that.
to have gone for decades just being praised for the things you're really good at?
Well, it's a lesson not to compare yourself with others, isn't it? Don't compare what you don't have.
And it's been 5 minutes.
Absolutely, and I'm grateful that I can put a few words together. The Left-Handed Booksellers of London, illustrated here, is a fantasy thriller. It's a crossover title. It's published as adult in the United Kingdom and in Australia. It's always a toss-up whether the book's a young adult or adult. I hesitate to use the term adult fantasy because that's often misconstrued, but it is published just as fantasy elsewhere. So it's for teenage readers and up whenever you're capable of getting that top level of the story. And it's the story of a young woman called Susan who, in a version of 1983 England, it's kind of a slightly alternate 1983 because I wanted it to be a more diverse and inclusive and gender equal 1983, much more so than the actual 1983 was. In that 1983, she's never known her father. She has a few clues from her somewhat absent-minded mother, and she decides to go to London before she takes up a spot at art school to search for her father. Almost immediately she arrives in London, she meets and is drawn into the adventures of a left-handed bookseller called Merlin. And Merlin is a left-handed bookseller. He is one of a secret society of booksellers whose job it is to control and police the old world, the mythic entities and creatures and powers that lie beneath the contemporary world. And so Susan's search for her father is soon embroiled in the bookseller's investigation of what happened to Merlin's mother and also Merlin's sister Vivian, who is a right-handed bookseller. The left-handed booksellers are kind of like the field agents. They go and do they're the fighting booksellers. The right-handed booksellers are the controllers and researchers who also have magical powers of their own, but not involved with
I'm going to
the
interrupt
fighting
you
and
here.
doing. Yeah, sure.
because I read where you came up with a very original idea for this. Will you tell us what that was? Because I thought that was great.
Well, it's
This
one of those
just the
things.
title I thought was very clever.
Yeah, there's this kind of the fuel. I mean, the fuel for this is building up over many years, and I can talk about the influences and the little, you gather stuff in your mind for a long time before it all sort of joins together and becomes a story. So there's many things that went before, including my own time as a bookseller and many influential books and so on. And there's a reason for 1980. It's set in 1983 as well. But the actual spark that kind of set all this off was when I was on tour for my book Golden Hand, the 5th book in the Old Kingdom series. And I was in Leith, the port part of Edinburgh, and I was signing Golden Hand. And the bookseller who was helping me, called Stephen, was left-handed. And I was probably left-handed when I was a boy, because I'm of an age where you weren't allowed to be left-handed. You were prevented from being left-handed at school.
My mother
but I can write with my left hand. I can draw with my left hand. Not as, equally not as well as with my right hand. And so I've always kind of been interested in left-handedness, and one of my sons is left-handed and other members of my family. So I said to him, "Oh, you're left-handed?" And he said, yes, I am. We all are. All the booksellers in the shop are left-handed. And he said,
did you say it in a haunted voice? I mean, was there
no, it's just kind of like this.
In the background?
Yeah, we're all just left-handed. We're all left-handed. It was all very casual. And he said, no, I think, there's more left-handed people in bookshops than anywhere else. There's a concentration of left-handed people in bookshops. And I thought, left-handed booksellers, the left-handed booksellers of Leith. And I thought, oh, there's a story in that. And that's what set it off.
So much. I was just in a bookstore, an indie bookstore in Boston, just 2 days ago, and I was standing there signing books, and I said, I'm headed up to Salem right after this. And the bookseller looks at me and he goes, Salem, there's a museum open there now. Don't go there. And I said, wait, what? And he goes, yes, there's a Salem or a museum in Salem. I don't remember which one it is. Don't go there. Only it wasn't kind of a hollow voice.
Did he refer to you as Goody Stiefvater? Don't go there, Goody Stiefvater.
That's what I was thinking. And I said, well, what happened to you there? He goes, I don't know. I just remember that there was things there, but it felt empty. There was a room full of bird corpses. And I thought, hold the phones. Next novel happening right now. And until he looked it up on his phone, and he goes, it's the Peabody Essex Museum. And the other bookseller says, it's a perfectly nice museum. So clearly, this young man went to a completely different place where it seemed like there were things, but it was empty. And there was a room that was full of bird corpses. I don't know where he went, but that is the museum I want to go to.
Yeah,
and the museum I will write my next book about.
Booksellers often give you these handy tips, don't they?
They do, indeed. Anyway, I interrupted you. Go on.
No. I'm curious about the bird corpses in the museum in Salem now. I
know, but when you think about it, we see bird corpses every day, right? Because we all eat chicken.
It is also that term bird corpse, which is interesting. I mean, were they like freshly killed birds? Are there pheasants hanging in racks?
Elevates them, yes.
Skeletons of birds, like an anatomical museum. I mean,
I believe that they were taxidermy after some questions.
Taxidermied, right.
Right, so they had all of their good parts still around. Okay.
The plumage, yes. The beautiful plumage was still intact.
Except for their souls, yes.
Except for their souls,
exactly. Yeah. All right, so I want to ask you, this was partially inspired by your time as a bookseller, which was a brief time, right? So I want to tell me about what struck you about bookselling. The thing I love about bookselling is that it is like a calling. I love that you wrote this book about it being sort of a thing which is bigger than merely putting a product in someone's hands. So talk about bookselling.
Well, I think it is. It's much bigger. It's much bigger than that, because books are not just a product, I think is the key to it. I was a bookseller. It was my first job out of university. I knew I wanted to work in the book business, and being in a bookshop was a great way to start. I actually would have stayed much, much longer, I think, but I worked for a family-owned bookshop in Canberra, which is the federal capital of Australia. It's quite a small city, and it was a very small city then. But like Washington DC, with all the kind of federal government apparatus and museums and cultural institutions and so on. So I'm bolted on top of it. So it was actually a very big bookshop, despite the fact it was a small city. And there's many elements in the Left-Handed Booksellers of London because they run two bookshops. They run the old bookshop, which sells new books in Charing Cross Road, and the new bookshop, which sells old and collectible books in Mayfair. But the old bookshop, which sells the new books, is very much based upon on Dalton's in Canberra, and also some of the classic London bookshops that I visited over many years. And it was just a tremendous place to work. I worked with my friends, and I think the thing, I loved being part of that sort of inward flow of books with new releases coming in and seeing new things come in and new editions of old books, but also matching people to books, I think, is also a calling. You are a matchmaker. You're helping people find things they didn't even know they wanted, and that will help them often, and it will entertain them. It will help them learn things. It will help them work out things, help them work through things. Books do so much, and I loved matching books to people, particularly when they didn't actually know what they wanted, when they didn't actually know what book they were after, and also, of course, the sort of the sometimes annoying detective missions of when people came in and say, I want a book and I saw it over there a year ago and it had a green cover, or maybe it was blue, but I'm pretty sure it was on the second shelf, or maybe it was the third shelf. Oh, you've moved that section. Oh, well, what was it a year ago? What was that section here? And when you can actually find the book, you always feel
you're a magician.
Yeah, absolutely. You are a magician.
Wizard is what Merlin.
A wizard, yes, like Merlin the magician. No, the wizard. Yes, there is a distinction. So I love book selling, and I probably would have stayed doing it considerably longer. I was writing as well. I've been a writer for a very long time, but had many jobs at the same time. And after working in the bookshop, I went on to work in many different jobs in publishing. But my favourite jobs in the whole world of publishing were being a bookseller, which is right at the very front end of the business, and also being a literary agent, which is at kind of like the other end.
The same thing, except for
but it is.
Matchmaking.
It's matchmaking. Exactly. It's the same. It's transferring your enthusiasm for a book to someone who can then transfer it to many, many others. So, and I worked as an editor as well, but I like that less, possibly because it's very hard work. And it's not so much about
no one smiles at editors, right? You only get the sad faces as an editor.
Well,
if you ever have a bookshop, there's a lot of other owned bookshops here in the States.
I have considered it various times, and in fact, interestingly, we were talking in the pre-show chat about friends who don't finish their writing. A very good friend of mine who I was at university with, who sadly he died very young, about 8 years ago. But we always talked about starting a bookshop because he was a bookseller and a writer who never finished things. He was a brilliant writer, but he didn't finish things. And if you don't finish, of course, as we know, nothing can happen. When you finish something, you create possibility. But we used to always
terrible writers who actually get to the end. Yes.
Yes. But we used to talk about opening a bookshop often, and we always came to the same conclusion that neither of us could afford to lose that much money. Sadly, it's a marginal business, and I really admire booksellers for what they can make of it. But it is a hard road, particularly for to be an independent bookseller. I guess I was never brave enough is probably.
You're just not old enough. You're not there yet. I have a friend, a very dear friend, who was actually with me on one of my road trip driving tours, which we were talking about, during which my brakes failed. She's a great kind of friend that sits there, and she was knitting along. And I said, Brenna, I don't mean to trouble you. We're going 70 miles an hour, but I have no brakes. And she put down her knitting and she picked up her phone and said, the next exit is in a half mile. So she's just one of those people.
Very
She
calm.
also wearing an enormous beehive hairstyle. She always wears dresses that look like lace doilies. She told me, she said, Maggie, I realize that you're much too fast now for this kind of thing. But when you're old and you have a vanity project and it's this bookshop which just looks impeccable, and I've become a widow, you'll notice that she's going straight on ahead.
She's worked it all out. Yeah.
I'll come and live with the cat in your store, and I'll be very good behind your cash register. So you're just not old enough yet.
That's possibly true. And my thoughts do tend towards having a bookshop at some point. I'm certainly getting there, I think, though. So, yeah, you never know.
Cobblestone Road, I think, is important. It's got to be the aesthetic, right?
Yeah, there's lots of aesthetics. I would have a bar in my bookshop, for example, and possibly...
It's like an adult Starbucks. Wait.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. I would have a cafe as well, I think, and a ramen bar, I think. So all of those things. So... but you could take the books. And I mean, this is another reason why you'd have to be able to lose quite a lot of money. If you could let people take the books into all of those things, it would be potentially troublesome, but fantastic.
You know what? I was creeping on your Twitter account, and I saw that you retweeted an old bookstore that doesn't exist anymore, that used to have a fernery in it. I don't know if you remember that article.
Yeah,
it was an enormous bookstore, and in it,
it's a very strange
giant fernery where you could sit amongst ferns, and I thought that would be bookstore.
That was Cole's Book Arcade in Melbourne, which was sort of late 19th century, early 20th century. It was a very, very strange bookshop, and I'd actually forgotten all about it.
So they won't compete with you, so it's fine.
Yeah,
Your
they're gone.
House it's no competitors.
Yes.
Good.
Mine,
okay,
yes, a fernery.
Segues perfectly old things into old influences and old magic. When I was reading your book, I thought to myself, Garth and I grew up reading the exact same books. I can just see it right there. The pedigree of Left-Handed is so clear. All of these old fantasies that talk about touching the other side, touching old magic, of there being a divide between the new and the old, the fae and the non-fae. So I imagine that you grew up reading Susan Cooper and the Chronicles of Narnia and all of these good things. So will you talk about the influences of these old books and old magic that made their way into this book?
Yes, I mean, you're absolutely right. And of course, this is very much Maggie Stiefvater territory too, with the contemporary world sitting on top of the magical world and the two intermingling. I hadn't actually thought of that until just now, actually. So I'm intruding on
your fully into my world. This is what I love to read, and so I was very happy to see you doing that.
Good. Oh, I'm glad to hear that. I'm always happy too when people do things that, because I always like to try and write the books that I like to read. So the more of them, the better. But yes, certainly. I mean, and I guess with the Left-Handed Booksellers of London, it's one of the few novels that actually includes mention of those, many of those influences as part of the actual narrative, because at one point, Susan and Merlin are in the old bookshop. Sorry, they're in the new bookshop, which sells the old books, and she sees a whole lot of collectible editions of many of her favourites, which are also my favourites. And Merlin is complaining because children's writers are dangerous because they accidentally let out information and cause all kinds of trouble. And some of the books mentioned there are, of course, I mean, Susan Cooper, The Dark is Rising, very important. Alan Garner's The Wisdom of Brisingamen, also very significant. Joy Chant, who's less well known. Nicholas Stewart Gray. There's lots of them from that era, from the sort of 50s, 60s, 70s, writing about the mythic world and the contemporary world and the mingling between the two. So they were a massive influence. And part of the reason why the book is set in 1983 is because that's when I first went to the United Kingdom, and actually we're talking about cars catching on fire before, as you do, if you're talking to Maggie. That's when I first went to the United Kingdom, and I bought this Austin 1600. It had a gold flame stripe up the bonnet.
Very snazzy.
Yeah, which made it go much faster. So aside from catching a light once and having a wheel fall off once, it was a good car, and a few other little problems. But one of the things I did was that I reread many of my favourites while I was visiting different places across the United Kingdom. So I reread The Wisdom of Brisingamen by Alan Garner in Cheshire, and I climbed Orderly Edge and so on to sort of experience the geography that had informed those books so much. And I went looking for Susan Cooper's Hampshire. It's actually harder to sort of pinpoint where that is, but you can get the feel of it, of The Dark is Rising, from many places, around many places in England. So that is also the time when I decided I wanted to be a writer, that I was going to try and be a writer. And luckily I'd read enough sort of about the business of writing and writers' lives, and sort of know I'd also need other jobs. But I knew that I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to try and write books, and probably books like the ones I most loved to read, which were children's fantasy, amongst many other things, because I always have read very widely. But I guess at the pinnacle of my loves, that's one of them. So 1983 is not only the year that I know the United Kingdom best, even though I've made it slightly alternate, it also was really important for me as a writer. And those books were really important. So I think that's part of it. I talked about the spark came from that Left-Handed Bookseller in Leeds, yes, but the fuel had been laid down long before. Many other writers, Robert C. O'Brien, who wrote the Silver Crown. I mean, he's much better known for Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of Nim, but the Silver Crown is another one of those. Seems contemporary, and then the strangeness begins to come in. And I love that stuff. I love that there's other things going on at the same time, and they've always been going on. You just didn't know you weren't part of it, or you couldn't see it, or whatever.
As a fantasy reader and writer, I've always been interested in watching that cycle of old magic to sort of new magic happening in fantasy. You can see how the further away we all feel like we get from old magic in society, you can start to see fiction catch up, where first it's about discovering it and this is a world we didn't think that we had because it's suburban now. Then it slowly becomes that we have to protect this world, and then it gets stylized again, so it's no longer the old kind of real magic. Instead, it turns into Buffy, right? And then we get into a contemporary slough of Jodi Picoult novels, right? And then we go, oh wait, magic exists again, and it bubbles up from under the ground again. And I just like watching this over and over again. And I feel like right in this moment, we're actually going through that resurgence of that old mythic fiction, because people feel like they've lost touch with it, and that's when it starts to bubble up. So what do you think you were reaching for? Why did you love those books? What appealed about the old mythic fiction? I mean, Alan Garner is a pretty intractable stuff. I actually read Susan Cooper as a child, but Alan Garner as an adult, and it's quite...
It depends which Alan Garner you're talking about, because the Wheatstone of Brisingamen and the Moon of Gomrith are actually fairly classic sort of accessible children's fantasy.
I read the Owl Service first.
Yeah, well, I love the Owl Service, but it is a more difficult book. I mean, it is an incredible book. It's the sort of emotional charge at the end of that book is amazing, but it is a more complex and difficult book. And then, of course, you get to Red Shift, and which is very enormously puzzling, but also brilliant. And then later, even more, he becomes even more puzzling. But the Wheatstone of Brisingamen and the Moon of Gomrith, which is a duology, are very accessible. Really as accessible as The Dark is Rising.
I recommend them. Order them now. Links in the
absolutely. But they're deeply rooted in a very local myth and legend from Cheshire. But they are a much easier read than Alan Garner, as some of his later works, which I've read and loved, but much later. I mean, I think I read The Wheatstone of Brisingamen and the Moon of Gomrith, and I was like, give me more Alan Garner. And I think I then read Red Shift, and I was 12, and I'm, what? But then I've reread it many times since then, and it's one of those books that gives you a different experience every time, really. But I think what attracted me is the idea that there could be this mythic layer underneath my own. I wanted it to be true. I mean, in the same way that you want to wake up and be an old one on your birthday, and you're incredibly disappointed when it doesn't happen. I wanted to believe.
You. Well, I got given all of these gifts, obviously, when I got my birthday.
Well, some, I was unlucky. It didn't work out that way, but. I wanted those. I think that's all good fiction does that. You want it to be real, and I suppose those kinds of stories where it's the contemporary and the mythic makes it feel more like it could actually be real. It could be real for you.
Well, see, I'm intrigued by this, though, because I think that's so true. It is very much wish fulfillment. When real diehard fantasy readers, and I assume everybody who's in this event is a diehard fantasy reader, we read those and we say we want magic to be real. But likewise, there are folks that open up a thriller and it's one of those, manly doodly thrillers where the guy is tapped by the CIA because even though he's an ordinary man, he is going to be an operative now. And that's also wish fulfillment.
Yeah, well, I like those. I like those too.
So what I think is interesting about the wish fulfillment of fantasy is that you're wishing for something very strange and beyond you that you can't understand, that you can't really be a part of, because that's a big part of Left-Handed, right? Is that the worlds are separate, right? There's consequences. When Susan first goes onto that old track, and we'll get back to the old track, when she first goes onto the old track, she's told afterwards that she's been marked, right? It's easier for them to see her now because it's dangerous, and it's been dangerous for a long time. So why do you think you were attracted to the fact, something that's other? Why do we as readers want that?
Well, I think there's sort of two things there. I mean, you want it to be true, but you're also relieved that it isn't. It's only in the book. I think that's part of the great part of books, is that you can have experiences which actually in real life would be deeply disturbing and beyond troubling, and to be honest, in many fantasy novels you just die in the first 2 or 3 pages, and like a normal person that will be it. But you can have that adventure, you can sort of feel like it's real, but it's not. It's that old thing of being able to safely live someone else's life. Yes. And it could be an historical novel, it could be a thriller, it could be anything, and you can experience that from the safety of your armchair. I think that's a double attraction. Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned thrillers because, as well as the fantasy authors who are deeply influential on this book, I love thrillers. I love mysteries. There's a big influence of 60s and 70s thriller writers in the Left-Handed Booksellers as well.
I loved reading those growing up too. Me and Jack Higgins, man. Oh.
Yeah, I mean, Len Dayton, Le Carre, Desmond Bagley, Alistair MacLean, all those guys. They're nearly always guys with a few exceptions, which is something to redress, I guess. And one of the reasons that I mixed up my 1983. But I love those. I love those stories too, and I love. Though there's less of an influence, I do give a tip of my hat to them in the book. I love the 20s and 30s, golden age detective writers who are mostly women, Dorothy Sayers and Naomi Marsh and Marjorie Allingham. Though I'm not an Agatha Christie fan because it's all plot. It's too much plot, not enough of the other stuff.
So thinking not many characters.
Yeah, but people. I recognise why people love Agatha Christie, but I just love Dorothy Sayers and Marjorie Allingham and so on more because I'm so much more interested in the characters and their stories than I am in. I don't care who killed who. It's like that doesn't matter. But I'm really interested in what's going on with Lord Peter Wimsey and Harriet Vane.
So what do you think made it in from the thrillers into Left-Hand? Do you think structure made it in? Do you think the aesthetics made it in? What's the thriller stamp on there?
I think it's part of it's the tone, the pace. It's an adventure. Yeah, it's that momentum. I think is very much from that, and also there's elements of the story. The booksellers are a kind of police force. And they are involved with the actual police as well. So there's elements of the police procedural there as well. In as much as it is the work of kind of arcane police who have to interface with the normal police and who don't like that, of course, having to deal with those weirdos or having to work with those weirdos rather. So there's that I think is very very much drawn from those influences and also film and television. And I do make again a few tips of the hat to some of my favourite shows from the late 70s and 80s, except for I gender swapped them. In this world, The Professionals, the two main stars, Bodie and Doyle, are women, and so on, which just makes it more interesting, I think. Well, as soon as I wrote it, I thought they should make that show. Even now, they should remake The Professionals with all
I would
all-women cast.
watch that in a heartbeat.
Yeah, it'd be fantastic. Set it in a more equitable 80s. It'd be great.
Yes, perfect. So speaking of gender, Merlin is a quite dashing figure in this book, and he says that he was born male, but he has the option of swapping. He's a very fantastic dresser. I recall from our tour that you were quite snazzy dresser as well.
Oh, nothing like Merlin.
And I love that Merlin is a very snazzy dresser. I love this because there's a very long mythic tradition, of course, of gender swapping shapeshifters, and it fell out of fashion as we became more Victorian and Puritan in our thoughts. Were you thinking about this, or were you thinking about the current moment when you decided to include Merlin as a character?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, he describes himself as, he just says they're all somewhat shapeshiftery. And I've always liked the idea of shape-shifting and being able to be a different person and being able to change your physical form to reflect, who you are or who you want to be.
I agree. I would like to be Emma Thompson.
I love Emma Thompson. Isn't she wonderful?
We would both make a great Emma Thompson, I think.
Oh, well, I'm not sure I would make a great one, but it would be nice to have the opportunity. But yes, we can form an Emma Thompson appreciation society, at least anyway, Maggie. And in fact, I just watched her Sense and Sensibility the other day. It's great, wonderful. It's one of the best adaptations, I think, of Austen.
It really is. It's a very good one.
Which,
so Merlin, you were thinking about, yes.
Sorry.
About being Emma Thompson. Oh, I was thinking.
Yeah. So sorry, going back to the question. I think it's a lot of what I do with characters is always instinct. I don't know much about them before I start. In fact, I often know almost nothing. And as I write them, I learn more about them. And that was just one of the things that seemed absolutely right for Merlin from the very beginning. And in fact, the beginning of the book, the beginning of chapter 1 is the first part that I wrote. I nearly always write something. I get an idea, I think about it for ages, I make some notes, and then I write a prologue or a first chapter, or sometimes just a sequence, which is kind of like a proof of concept, to find the tone and just to work out what it's going to be. And that was that part where the book begins. So there is now a prologue. I added a prologue later where Merlin is described in some of his very flashy dressing.
Snazzy clothing.
Yes, and it just seemed right to me that you couldn't tell whether, was he a young man or was he a young woman dressed as wearing a man's suit. But probably I'm sure that some of what has been relatively recent, I guess, over the last maybe decade or so, discussions and there's the zeitgeist around gender and what gender means and so on. It was probably lurking in the back of my mind. So it's like many things in my books. It's very hard to say it's a conscious decision. A lot of it's sort of subconscious or just instinct, but it's informed by everything around you. I mean, the world, zeitgeist, the things you've been reading, the things you've read over your entire life. I mean, all of those things go together. But I often find it quite difficult to be able to work out what I was doing. Yes. I don't know. Not many authors seem very, very clear, and I can say with.
Yeah, that would not have been for me. Well, I would have loved it as a teen. As a teen, I always felt that I wasn't male or female. I was just me. I was very annoyed by having to, pick one or the other. So I would have liked very much being able to see Merlin like that. All right. So before we go to audience questions, I have a final question, which is: have you experienced any kind of old magic? Do you have a moment, like when you were wandering in the UK for the first time?
Yeah. That's a very good question. And I have various answers for it, some of which involve quite convoluted long stories, and this is not the right place for. I've certainly felt, I've had experiences where I've been unable to explain what I've either been observing or I've been feeling, or I've felt the presence other than what could be rationally explained by what was going on around me. Nothing as extreme as seeing a sort of full-blown ghost person in Edwardian clothing, drifting along with a hoop or any of that sort of stuff. But certainly things that just feel very strange, and things which on a rational level you can explain, or you could have a scientist explain to you, like strange rolling fog banks that come out of nowhere and stream across you and then go away again. And I'm sure that a climatologist or a meteorologist could explain to me exactly why that happened in that place, even though it was so localized. But it certainly feels like something. It feels very different because, and I think often it is because when it is very local, it's so localized. You think, how can this be happening just here and not everywhere else? How come I can see the sun shining, on the hill there, and there's no water, and where did this fog come from? Things like that. So yeah, a few things that have made the hairs in the back of my neck stand up.
Well, I will close with my last old magic story, which my most recent one. I was on tour. I was in California. It was Topanga, and it's a very mystical sort of mountainous area. I was staying in an Airbnb. It was a tiny little house that was a guest house for a much larger house farther up the mountain. And it's one of those great mountains. It actually reminded me very much of Australia, in the sense that it was very much that tropical foliage stuck on the side of a very dry cliff. And I was very tired. I was laying in there at night, and there was a little deck around this tiny trailer. And in the middle of the night, I hear voices coming down from the main house. And I'm here thinking, they're having a party, I think, because I can hear them laughing. They're all laughing and carrying on. I can't make out what they're saying, but they're definitely coming down the main house towards the guest house. And I thought, they're having a party, and they've forgotten that they have someone staying at this Airbnb. They're going to come down here, and I'm sleeping in my total altogether, right? And I'm just going to lay here. And they're getting closer and closer and closer. And I think they really are coming. They're coming straight here. And then they start to climb onto the wooden planks all around this little house. And I realized now it's not 3 or 4 of them. I would say the number is many. There are many of them. They're all talking. They are raising their voices. They're shouting. They're laughing. They're clapping. They're stomping. I can hear the deck pounding against the side of it. And I think, I'm going to have to get up and go and tell them not to come in. They're coming towards the sliding doors at the end of it. They're going to come in here. And so I got out of the bed and I fumbled over. What did you imagine? I'm in my all together. I'm blind to the bat without my glasses on. So I'm like, boop, 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 boop. And I fumble for the light, getting louder and louder. I hit the light. The sound goes completely dead. It is absolutely dead. There's not a single soul out there. There is nothing at all. There is silence. There is darkness. So the next morning, I told the folks up at the house, I said, a very strange thing happened to me last night. And they said, oh yes, we know it happened up here too. And then I said, would you like to stay up here with us? And then they waggled their eyebrows, because that was the moment where I found out the other magical thing about the story was they were swingers. Anyway, the end. That was my touch of old magic and with old California.
That is kind of like a horrifying mashup of old magic and horrible new stuff, isn't it?
It's really my genre, I think, contemporary fantasy.
I wonder if it was many people would say that was a waking dream of some kind.
Yes, I think you could argue it. Raccoons, many clapping their hands.
Yeah. I once did have one of those really horrible things where I was asleep, and then I woke up and the front door of my apartment slammed open, and I heard and then something jumped on the bed, and then it jumped on my chest.
Oh, and it was a night terror.
It was a night, that's what people would describe. And I could not move. I was absolutely terrified. And then I woke up again, and I was in the dark in my apartment. I put all the lights on. I couldn't go back to sleep again.
I actually know the science of those.
Well, I've had it explained to me, but it was so terrifying. It was while I was writing Sobriel, actually. It might have had something to do with it. I'd only been asleep for like 2. I've been working, and I'd been asleep for about 2 hours. But I remember that so distinctly, that pure terror of not being able to move and hearing the movement towards me, and then the hag jumping on my chest.
Don't you think that you just perfectly described, though, the thrill of a fantasy novel, right? Because it's kind of a wonderful memory, isn't it? Like, you remember the terror. It was awful in the moment, But it was kind of a gift too, right? Because you never want to be that terrified for something for real, but it's kind of delicious because in the end it was all right.
Yeah, I was so terrified. I mean, I didn't go back to sleep. I had all the lights on till dawn. And,
You're actually still sleeping now, Garth.
Yeah, but yeah. Oh, that's, oh dear. Yes, the nightmare continues.
Yes.
So it's so fascinating, isn't it? What was that? Anyway, we probably should go to questions,
right? I feel like
this is fascinating.
But we terrify each other even more.
Of course, everyone on the chat is terrified. No, everyone's really enjoying your talk, but it is question time. So I think the first question we have really, kicks us off nicely, which is for both of you, are you right-handed or left-handed?
Well, I'm mostly right-handed, but I can write with my left hand, though not as well as I once did, because I'm old. I have arthritis, and I'm a writer. I have arthritis in the thumbs of both hands, and it's much worse in my left hand. Strangely, I was signing book plates, many thousands of book plates for this book. And you'd think, and I actually started signing with my left hand because I thought that would be cool, my left-handed signature. But I had to stop because it hurt my thumb too much. But then when I was signing with my right hand, I noticed this last year, same deal. Even though I'm writing with my right hand, at the end of signing for a couple of hours, I might have done 1,000 in a couple of hours or maybe more, my left thumb would be incredibly sore, even though I wasn't writing with that. Now, something about the movement of book plates, or in fact, when I was signing books, opening books as well, it's kind of like, it's my left thumb telling me, no, I don't like any of this. So yeah, I'm mostly right-handed. I guess I'm somewhat ambidextrous.
Well, right. When you tap your foot, which foot do you tap?
Sometimes I tap with my left foot as well as my right foot.
Yeah, I think, there you go. If you're stepping out, which foot do you step out with first?
Sometimes my left foot. Not always my right foot.
The reason why I ask is because I was the pipe sergeant of a bagpipe band when I was in college. And so it was my job to be the second in command, make everybody step off on the same foot at the same time. So we could all look like dorks at the same time. And we had terrible problems with our left-handed people because they always wanted to step off with their left foot first.
That's interesting because a very long time ago, I was in the Australian Army Reserve, and marching, you step off with your left foot. So the way
you were in your moment. Well, I am right-handed. I'm definitely right-handed. Short answer.
Let's see. Garth, I'm considering a career change to bookseller. They ask, this is from Nicole. She does ask where she can apply. I mean, if you're in the Bay Area, check out Booksync.
I think possibly that's...
what do they like to see on a resume or a CV? Do you have an answer?
That's possibly a desire to be one of the Saint-Jacques booksellers, as per the book.
I'm taking it seriously.
Well, if it's a serious question, I think definitely talk to your local booksellers, and what they like to see is a great enthusiasm for books, which goes beyond standing and reading them in the bookshop, because you can't do that, and all the usual things for any kind of job. But I do think a love of books and a great interest in how it all works is very helpful too, in terms of knowledge, learning about authors and how things are published and so on is all very helpful. If it was to be one of the left or right-handed booksellers, while it's a clan that is not closed, that you do have to be born into it up to a point. But the booksellers don't marry each other; they marry out. They just have, it's just, as it says in the book, it's kind of like various religious practices where you have to promise to raise the children to be booksellers, which is no small commitment, of course, because they go off to boarding school quite young. I mean, to many British people and some Australian people, and probably a fewer number of Americans, that would just be normal. The kids always get sent off to boarding school, but I've always thought that would actually be a massive imposition on a family to have to send your kids off at age 6 or 8 and only see them some of the time. But yeah, so that's how you be one of those booksellers, possibly with some exceptions. There might be some other ways to become one, but it's the kind of thing I'd only ever discuss in the book. I hate answering questions like that. I'd say, oh, I'll keep it for a story, or a story or another book.
All right, next one. Let's see. Oh, here's another question from Kate. She is asking you both, what book would you match to each other?
It's an interesting question.
Hard one, yeah.
Oh, I know what I would actually choose.
Do you?
Yeah, I think so. I think I would go for, maybe you've already read it, London Calling by Paul Cornell.
I have read Paul's. Yes, I've read Paul's London Calling. Yes.
Yes.
Which I enjoyed. I'm actually thinking further back. I mean, it's interesting talking about Alan Garner. One of his other books, which is sort of slightly less accessible than The Weird Center Brisingamen, but not as strange as some of his later books. And they're strange but compelling. Is a book called Elidor, Elidor, which I think
short story. I read a short story.
It's a short novel.
Is it Elidor and the Golden Ball?
No. It's set in not that long post-war London, where a family of kids basically find a doorway to another world on a building site where they're rebuilding, bomb damaged stuff, but it's to a world that's actually is decaying and is being destroyed, and they're drawn into trying to save it, but they come back to their own world, and most of it's actually in, I guess, 1950s London, but it's so full of dread and magic, and I think you would like it, Maggie.
It's amazing. That was a very good booksellery job that you just did right there.
Good. Yeah. Oh, the old habits, they live on.
Still got it.
Yeah. So I hope it's still easily available. I mean, I think
Elena just messaged me that they were both not in print here in the United States.
Yeah, it
doesn't matter. I will find it. I have such confidence.
Sorry to the US.
Yeah, you would find it. Yeah,
you can find it, but unfortunately not through BookSync. Let's see. Waverly asked a good question to kind of segue. She wants to know, what's the most magical place both of you have ever been in real life? Or also, where should my next vacation be when the world opens up again, is what she's asking.
Well, I think there's so many magical places, and sometimes it's just a matter of catching them at the right moment. And they can be very close by. They can be just around the corner. Years ago in Sydney, I lived near a park, and I used to walk there almost every day. And then one morning I walked to a corner where I didn't normally go because it sort of backed onto this old industrial zone. And I walked to the corner of the park, and I was looking out at the sort of piles of timber and a container sort of dock. And then I sort of looked across and I saw that there was actually a disused railway tunnel just off to my left, which I had never noticed was there before. And I couldn't get all that close to it, but I got close enough to sort of look up it, and I thought, and it was clearly disused, but this is right in the middle of Sydney. And I thought, there's the railway line, and looking down the tunnel, it appeared to actually go under my house, which was only a block and a half away. And so I looked it up later, and in fact, it did go almost directly under my house. And I never knew it was there. And looking in that tunnel, when I looked in the tunnel, all the noise of the city just stopped for a few minutes around me. I had no aircraft overhead. I couldn't hear the traffic. I couldn't hear boats this was just near a sort of an offshoot of the harbour. I couldn't hear, it was just total silence, no people. And that was an incredibly magical moment. And I went back numerous times after that, and it was just like, oh, there's an old railway tunnel and there's everything else. There's kids playing soccer nearby. So I think sometimes it's a combination of time and place. And it's just, yeah, being there at the right time, which I'm sure doesn't really answer the travel destination question. I think if you love history and you love children's fantasy of the kind that Maggie and I have been talking about, then certainly there's many places in the United Kingdom to visit, in Scotland and England, and I love the Lake District there. But there's many fantastic places to visit, but also in the United States and here in Australia, there's so many areas of natural beauty which also feel mysterious and fabulous in the sense of feeling as if there's far more to them than is what you see. Maggie, if you've got something better, can you answer that better than me?
I think it's true what you say. A lot of it's the moment, right? The moment is magical and the place just happens to be there. It's a crime of opportunity. However, as far as visiting goes, I mean, one of the huge things I wanted to do with the Raven Cycle is growing up reading all of this British fantasy. It always felt like magic was around the corner, but only if you lived 3,000 miles away. So when I was writing the Raven Cycle, the idea was, can I find that kind of magic here in the US? So I tried to put everything that I knew of the Shenandoah Valley, which I think is a very liminal kind of space, into this book. But for me, I guess, a magical place that actually can also be visited. You can explain this one away as well, Garth, if you like, but it was a magical moment because at the time I was a full-time artist. And I remember I had this vivid dream, just one of those dreams where it felt like when you woke up, you could describe every blade of grass. And I remember that in this dream, I had to go through past a newer church. And then there was this huge ruined church without a roof in front of me. And I had to climb 200 stairs to get to it. And I just felt like I had been there. So when I woke up, I was so haunted by it. I went to my artist critique group, because I had a critique group then for my art, like I did for my writing now. And I said, I just had this most incredibly vivid dream about this big ruined church and a second church. There were 200 steps. And one of my British friends said, Maggie, that place exists. And do you already know what this place is? Because I didn't know. And she said, yes, it's Whitby Abbey. It's famous for its 199 steps.
Yes,
and
I've
it's
been
an
there.
enormous ruined church at the edge of a cliff top. And so I looked up the thing online and I thought, that's amazing. That looks just like it. And I thought, surely, well, I was a history major. I studied 14th century Scotland and history. Surely it's right there on the border. I've seen pictures and it made it into my dreams, but it was still no less magical for that. Years later, when I could finally afford to go to the UK, that was the first place we went, landed on a plane in London and drove all the way up, and you know how far of a drive that was, all the way up there, and it was right at the end of the day, so it was just like the dream. The Abbey was closed, but you had to walk by a newer church to get there. We jumped the fence, I'm sad to say, and I went around into where I knew inside the Abbey would look a particular way. And indeed, I got to stand inside that dream, in that ruined Abbey on a cliffside at the end of sunset. And I have to tell you, even if you didn't dream about it first, it's a magical place to go. I mean, it's perfect. It's got lovely history too. It was in Dracula, apparently.
I was just going to say, Dracula is
Caedmon's Way, and Caedmon was a monk who supposedly has a vision from God. He was talentless like Garth, and then God struck him with powers of storytelling and magic and music. Anyway, Whitby Abbey, yeah, Yorkshire.
That's so interesting about the dream, though. That is very, very interesting.
I
very rarely remember my dreams.
Really?
Very, very rarely. I probably remember one dream a year. We actually talked about this on that Spirit Animals tour because Sean Williams, who is with us, Sean remembers his dreams, and he can dream a story and then write it, which I've always been very jealous of. Yes. Because I just don't have that. I don't.
They're usually very silly, though.
Well, it's given him
my
material.
dreams.
No, Sean's
dreams. Like you're up to your neck in cheese or something. Do you
I
want to know the worst dream I've ever heard, though? It just happened this last week, so it's very fresh on my mind. It's not my dream. I just spent the weekend on a writing retreat in a petting farm in Connecticut. And when I got there, it's all of these alpacas and pigs and whatever. And there's a sign and it says birthday parties and events. And it's for you to hold chickens. And I said, there it is. That's where I'm holding my next event, right here. And then next morning, you can find the tweet. You can search my name. Someone said, I just dreamt that I had an event with Maggie Stiefvater at a petting farm. And I thought, nothing is sacred. There you go.
Synchronicity. That's strange.
Yeah.
How are your goats, by the way? How are your little fainting goats, Maggie?
I have 9 of them. They're lovely. I'm actually now a goat dealer, like the gateway to other goats. I actually convinced someone else to go and get more fainting goats. They drove up here and they said, maybe I'll just look. No, their arms are full of them. You're a bookseller. I'm a goat seller.
These are some of the things that you learn about your fellow authors on tour. And you always learn new things. I did not even know about the existence of fainting goats until I met Maggie on that Spirit Animals tour and saw some footage of it. I was like, these can't be real. And of course, they are very real and very adorable. So I had to ask about the fainting goat.
You have a dog with a strange smile, right? Yes?
Well, I have a different dog than I did then. But yes, we have a new dog called
that black
Snuff.
dog, right? Yes?
Yeah, Snufkin. Yeah, named after the Moomin Trolls.
That's the one I saw, a strange smile.
He hasn't got a strange smile. He's got a lovely smile.
See his dog with a strange smile.
He's got a lovely smile.
Well,
you can see.
Maybe Elena can find I said maybe Elena can find a video of a fainting goat to share with everybody in the chat.
They're made for the internet.
We should get back to the questions.
Yeah, I hate to interrupt the cute animal talk. We've got quite a bit of questions here. A lot of people are asking about your writing process. So instead of asking them individually, I'm going to ask you to be very detailed on how you write, what your setting is like when you write, if you write by hand or if you type on the computer, what your favorite thing is about being a writer and maybe one of the biggest struggles that you experience. And if you have like a process, and if you focus on one book at a time. Those are all the questions balled into
all
one.
in one.
All in one.
Can I even remember all of that?
Yes, I'll help. If you
need. My process has changed. Yeah, my process has changed over the years. When all my earlier books, I wrote longhand in mostly black and red notebooks like this one, of which I have many. So I would write. This is a recent one. So I'd write longhand and then I'd write a chapter longhand, then I'd type it up, correcting it as I typed. So to be like the first typed version is actually a second draft. And then I would revise it and then go on again. I did that for about my first dozen books or so, but I stopped doing that when I wrote the Seventh Tower series, which was kind of like a serial novel. So it was very speedy. I wrote them very quickly. And so I just typed those, but I'd always written my short stories just typing. But I still write difficult passages, and some chapters I still write longhand, preferably in the black and red notebooks. I do have some blue and white stripy ones too. It was a terrible stationery drought one year. I had to get some other notebooks. It was very distressing. Never get caught up in I have to have this kind of notebook. It's a bad habit.
Oh, that's very charming, though.
Well, so when you can't get them is the problem. But so I used to do that, and now I don't. And I think it kind of illustrates there's so many different ways to write books. Novelists talk about how they wrote their last novel, and it may be something to emulate. It might be something to try yourself. But sometimes people get confused and think that's the only way to do it. There's so many different ways. Some people start at the end and go backwards, and then there's that. People talk about being plotters or pantsers, whether they plan everything and plot it all out, or they just begin at the beginning and go on. Most people are kind of a mix. I'm kind of a mix. I typically think about things for a long time. I make some notes. I mentioned that I write a kind of proof of concept, which may or may not ever end up in the book. Often it does as a prologue or the first chapter. Then I typically write a chapter outline where I set down everything that's going to happen in each chapter, which never happens because I never follow the outline. But I do the outline, and I still do them even though I know I'm not going to follow them because it's useful to me. But if you look at one of my outlines, then look at the book, you'd be like, what happened? Because they never bear much resemblance. But it's a useful part of the process. And then I usually, go from beginning to the end. Though occasionally I do skip forward to write key sequences or fill in things. I go backwards and fill things in or change significant parts of it. And sometimes I have to, I write a whole lot and then I have to throw it out and write it again and do a complete revision. So that happens as well. Was that all the questions sort of process was?
Do you drink coffee and tea while you write?
I drink tea, man.
I drink specific big spot?
No. I think you've got to be very careful not to think, I need my special beret and I've got to have this attic and I've got to have this particular MacBook or whatever, because they're really all...
Red notebook, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're often ways to just not, to procrastinate and not do it. So I do try not to get too hung up on all the particular sort of trappings that I think I might need. Of course, I actually often do employ all the same regular trappings, but I don't have to. That's what I tell myself. I don't know, Maggie, what about you?
It's interesting because last year, when we could all still travel, I taught a bunch of writing seminars to students. And it's interesting because teaching writing has nothing to do with actually writing, right? Because what you're trying to do is you not only have to think of why you do the things you do, you have to try and decide how many of the things that you do are actually useful and how many are coping devices, right? Or erroneous bits of noise in the process that if you could somehow manage to convince yourself not to do them, you'd be better without them. And then you actually have to find out how much of it is universal, right? And then you also have to find out how many things you have started, because you've been doing this for what, 20 years?
Oh, 30 years. Yeah, my first book came out 30 years ago.
It was a decade. And you have to find out how many of these steps have I actually made into one step? And when I say this is how you do it, I realize, I haven't actually realized that this used to be 4 steps for me and I have to explode it again. So it was very interesting because this year I was supposed to have one that was in Washington, D.C. in June. And of course that was in the height of nobody traveling anywhere. And it was my final push to actually put this online. I'm not a good public speaker. I talk too fast, as you've noticed. I go around in circles. And the idea of recording this thing was terrible. It took me all month to do the seminar, which grew to be 8 hours long. And I talked through my entire process. And what really struck me is that I spent almost half of that seminar trying to convince people that the real trick of writing a novel, and I think this is true, is learning how you personally can transfer something from the abstract to the concrete. And that's why it's different for every person. That's why there's so many different tips and tricks. It's translation, right? No matter how perfect you have that book in your head, like you said, it gets squirrely as soon as it gets onto the paper. The most perfect book writing process isn't writing the best book. It's making those two things match as much as possible. You can always revise it into anything. But if you can make it into that ideal, to me, that's the perfect writing process. And so that said, I taught one of the ways that I write novels. And I realized as soon as I did that was not true for all of my novels, that every single novel has a different part of the abstract that I get stuck on. And I have to spend more time figuring out how to tease that out. And sometimes it's drastic and sometimes it's simple, but I would say the one thing which is incredibly in line with yours is I do think about things for a long time. I used to think when I was a kid I had to dash them all out. And now I think, no, the longer it's been cooking back there, the better it gets.
Yeah, a lot of writing is done in the mind before it's ever on a page or on a screen.
Yes,
this is how we can explain that when we're lying on a couch with our eyes shut, we're actually hard at work. And sometimes it's even true. Actually, I should rephrase that. It's nearly always true.
Yes. So don't bother you on the couch.
People are listening.
It took me forever this year to understand that one of my problems is that I write a ton while I'm driving, which sounds very dangerous. But I mean, how many of us come up with ideas in the shower or when we're doing something else? So if I'm driving along, I'm problem solving. And it took me a long time to realize that during lockdown, I wasn't driving. I would get stuck because I had all these hours here in my technically perfect office with all my creature comforts, but I wasn't writing. I was thinking, just the same thing.
Yeah, I think, walking, I often sort things through my mind walking. I seriously do lie on a couch and just think things through, and quite often do work out what the problem is or what's holding me up through that process. Often you need to remove yourself from being actively in front of the computer or in front of your notebook or whatever, just to let your subconscious work on it. At the same time, your conscience is sort of conscious, not conscience, or possibly both, are feeding into each other as you go. And that thinking part is so important, because you can find the center of your novel or your story through that, and then that just propels everything else. But if you haven't got it, you can,
It's just words.
going
And
all
it
over the
gets harder,
place.
don't you think? The better you get at writing, I think. Because you
Well,
could write a page that looks, you would know it was wrong when you were younger because it would look
yes.
wrong. Anyone could read it and say, nothing happens in this chapter. Now I can write a very spiffy and beautiful chapter.
Yeah, you can probably hide it better. That's true, because your technique and artistry is improved. So you can, I mean, it's the emperor's no clothes, the no clothes thing, where you can convince people there's something there, but there isn't, because you have that skill developed over time. That's true, I think, but you still know when there's something lacking.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, we will not have time to answer all questions because there are a lot of questions here, but there are a couple that I want to ask, and this one is fun, from Annalisa. She wants to know if you have any favorite literary bookseller characters like Azrael from Good Omens or the grouchy guy from The Never-Ending Story.
Bookseller question.
Well, none immediately spring to mind. I actually hadn't read Good Omens until the TV show came out and my son was watching it, and I thought, wow, I've read I've read all of Terry Pratchett, I think, and all of Neil's books too. And I thought, wow, I've never actually read Good Omens. That's weird. So I bought it for my son and myself to fight over who got to read it first. So yes, I definitely, I like all the book selling stuff in that. And The Never-Ending Story, I have read. I did see the film when it first came out, which is like 100 years ago, I think. So I think probably I like bookseller characters wherever they appear. But no immediate favourites spring to mind. Mind you, this is my standard response whenever anyone asks me a favourite anything. My mind goes totally blank with panic. I can't think of anything.
Maggie, do you have anything to add, or are you panicked and blank?
Oh my gosh, I couldn't think of any. I just could remember all of my answers are dream answers. I'm so sorry, Garth. I really seriously don't have that.
Don't worry.
The other day I had a dream where I dreamt very vividly there was a guy in a hood, and he said that he was a bookstore reaper. He was there to take out bookstores. And I woke up and thought, I need to stop reading publishing before bed. I tell you what.
Yeah, no bookstore reapers.
Or are there?
And then I'm going to kind of group in a couple together in a general question. A lot of people are asking about old characters and stories that you've written, Garth, and seeing if there's going to be a continuation in their stories. So do you have anything in the pipeline that people can know about that they might be interested in hearing about?
Sure. Well, there is another Old Kingdom book coming hopefully this time next year, though I've been having some difficulties with it in this difficult year, I think, along with many other creative artists. The pressures of the outside world do tend to press in and divert your attention. But all being well, Terciel and Eleanor will be out this time next year. Terciel, of course, is Sabriel's father, and Eleanor is her mother. So I think telling you the title pretty much gives you a clue about what it's about. So another Old Kingdom novel coming, Terciel and Eleanor. And I always have notes and thoughts about almost everything I've written as potential sequels, including all my short stories. So you never know what may come. I have notes for another Left-Handed Booksellers book as well. So yes, who knows what will come, what will fight its way to the front of the queue in my mind to be written. But Terciel and Eleanor is next. And after that, who can say?
Well, hopefully we see you in the near future in person, sometime on a tour. And if you have been watching the chats, I'm sure you've seen there's lots of love going for all of your books and everything that you've been talking about. So everyone is very happy to have joined in on this event. There are lots of great questions that I wish we could ask, but we would have been here all night. I'm sure everybody would have stayed for it though. So thank you so much, Garth and Maggie, for doing this event for us. Thank you to all of our attendees who came in and were so active and asked questions. And your books are coming to you, I promise. I'm going to go ship them out myself tomorrow.
I should show you the special pin. I should.
Yes.
So the bookseller's badge as a pin. So this is their official badge.
And one of those painstakingly signed book plates.
It was designed by a Californian artist called Josh Wong, who's done some great work, and so shout out to him. I love having little physical things with my books, and I just wanted to make this pin real. So I was looking around for old British police badges, and so it's actually based on an old Somerset constabulary badge that I bought on eBay from the 1930s, and then Josh designed me a bookseller's badge. I think it's a very cool pin. I just love stuff like that. So sorry.
Someone asked if he did a Sabriel portfolio.
He did, yeah. He first came to this is one of the great things, I guess, about social media and also about what readers do. He as a college assignment, he did a design portfolio for a Sabriel film, designed the whole thing, and it's online. And one of the cool things that he did was he designed the 7 bells as 3D models, and he's made the 3D models available. So lots of cosplayers now have Josh Wong designed bells, Abhorson's bells, because they are very cool. So so I first saw that, and when I was thinking about who designs really great objects and things, and I thought, yeah, Josh Wong, I'll see if I can commission him, and luckily he was available, and I could commission him to do those pins. So I hope everyone who gets them likes them as much as I do. So just a fun thing to do.
Lots of love going on in the chat. So I think this is a very successful event. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Maggie.
You're welcome, Garth. Congratulations. I'm so happy to have this book out in the world.
Oh, thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to Swamp Thing, your new graphic novel.
Thanks.
Good choice. Great choice of character, I think.
Very creepy Stiefvater character, I think.
Yeah, but perfect.
Yes.
So and that's very soon, isn't it?
Yes. Oh gosh, next week.
Next week. Okay.
Yes.
Also, congratulations. Brilliant.
Thanks. Anyway, thank you guys all for coming and listening to us too.
Yes, thank you very much.
It's quite fun.
And thank you to Booksync as well.
We'll have this up on YouTube. Maybe I'll add the beginning chat at the end as a little special.
Sure, yeah.
But thank you so much. Have a great night, everyone, and a great day, Garth.
Thank you very much. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye. Stay safe.